part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hey everybody, it's your host, Don Mike Mendoza, back for another episode of Producing While Asian. This week, we have a conversation with Anant Das, who is a South Asian producer on Broadway in commercial theater, and is a recently new colleague and friend of mine. He is a creative producer, he's a theater investor, but he's most importantly the CEO of Broadway Boxed Up, which is the longest running theater-themed subscription service, which is about to turn 5 years old soon. And we talk about all the things from our thoughts on DEI in theater, where we think the industry is going, and favorite moments, challenges, and just what we hope will come out of the work that we do. So I'm not going to give too much else away, so I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Producing While Asian. Hey, Anant, how are you? Thank you so much for being here.
Hello, it's so great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Always. I'm so glad to chat with anyone that I meet in the producing community, especially if they're in our NHPI diaspora. And so I'm so excited to talk to you today because, of course, we met through Megan Ann Rasmussen, and you're a fellow Washingtonian. And I just want the audience to hear all the things about you and know how amazing you are. So we're just gonna get into it.
That sounds great.
So
Thank you.
So my first question for you, talk to our audience a little bit about who you are and where in the country you came from and what brought you into the arts and producing and to today. That's a very big question, but choose your journey on how you'd like to share that.
Yeah, no, that's such a great question. And I think there's no one route that anyone has to really get into producing or get into the arts, I feel like. And I'm sure many things in my story connect with many folks out there, but I lived most of my life growing up in the Northern Virginia area, but I immigrated from India when I was a baby, lived in a few places, ended up in Northern Virginia, just south of Washington, D.C., and grew up watching Bollywood films, loved
Nice.
Bollywood movies, and
Cool.
most Bollywood films, at least the very popular ones of the 90s and 2000s, are essentially movie musicals. And Indian culture is very performance arts heavy with acting and movies and cinema and musicals and things like that. So I've always had this interest in the arts, in acting, in musicals, and I started doing singing classes in elementary school, middle school, started doing some theater, kind of worked my way up like many folks do in school. I was growing up at the time, where Pitch Perfect and Glee were
Mm.
very popular. So a cappella show choir, that's where I wanted to be. My high school was the Glee Club. And so I kind of took a very theater adjacent path eventually, which I loved. And I also did percussion in school for a while, played the upright bass for many, many years. And so
Oh,
music and
wow.
music theory were really
Yeah.
important to me, all while still connected to theater. Smash the TV show. I always joke that's my
Yeah.
theater education. I never really
Oh,
had
wow.
formal theater education. And it was because
Mhm.
of that TV show I learned who Bernadette Peters was. I learned who Liza Minnelli was. And I learned what a dramaturg is and what previews and out of town tryouts and all of these things, I hadn't heard of before. Because even though DC has such a strong theater scene, because my family wasn't in it, we didn't know that any of it existed, or I didn't know how to
Mhm.
access that theater. I didn't understand what a regional theater was or what these shows were, that they were even happening until I was in college. And so
Mhm.
growing up, I didn't really have much theater outside of the TV shows and whatever was happening
Sure.
in school. And so that kind of my love for the arts just kind of kept growing. And I did a lot of digital music composition in college while actually studying finance and computer science. That's what I was studying because I didn't know how to make a career as a performer. Again, I didn't know anyone who did it.
Sure.
I did
Mhm.
not have a DC arts community that I was relying on. I know it's out there. I just didn't know it existed. But I knew I really loved startups and I really love the management of organizations and kind of that intersection between creativity and management. And I really wanted to find out what that business side of entertainment
Mhm.
was. And eventually I slowly was figuring that out. No one really had a good answer for me. I moved to New York after I graduated undergrad, started doing some extra gigs here and there. I just loved being on set. I just thought it was a great experience and I loved going to shows and really just connecting with people. Being in the room for me, it was about the human connection. And eventually the COVID happened. Like many, I fled New York and
Yeah.
started thinking about how do I bring theater to people?
Hmm.
Well, and there's no theater going on. And that's when the idea for my subscription box company, Broadway Box Stuff, came up, where
Hmm.
we work with shows and work with small businesses and we design and manufacture and ship out theater themed merchandise all over the world every month. And that became a really great
That's cool.
touch point for me to not only interact with theater fans all over the world and really know what they want and what they're interested in, but also became a reason for me to message actors, directors,
Yeah.
producers on Instagram. Like I had a reason to now. I wasn't just this
Hmm.
random person messaging them. And I started some really great conversations through this business. I was invited to join an app called Clubhouse, which was an
Oh yeah.
audio-based room app. And
Hmm.
there I just had conversations with so many producers. And I kind of learned like, okay, maybe
Yeah.
producing is what I'm really interested in, at least in theater. Maybe this is something I can do right
Hmm.
now. So I had my opportunity to produce and invest in a couple shows and produce. Actually, the very first thing I did was raise money for a reading. Before I did
Oh,
anything
nice.
commercial, I raised money for a reading. And it was the best experience, totally full circle. Again, growing up on Smash, the first episode,
Yeah.
they're in a studio sitting behind white tables, auditioning Karen and Ivy. And I felt like that sitting in Open Jar Studios behind a
Yeah.
white table, watching this
Oh.
reading rehearsal process. And it was such a full circle moment. And that's when, for the first time, I was like, wow, I feel like a producer. I'm doing the thing. And then since then, my career has just kind of snowballed into co-producing, executive producing, associate producing, various types of producing opportunities in the US and the UK for both theater and film and a
Hmm.
little bit of music. And it's just kind of spiraled in all sorts of directions. But that's kind of my journey until now.
Nice. That's so cool. I love that. And like I didn't know that you also produced abroad because like when you said UK, friend, I have a project for you. Let's talk after this podcast. It's musical, it is a movie. We will discuss it.
That sounds great. No, I
So
love
it's
the,
very cool.
international theater. Theater is so different in different places.
Yeah.
And I think it's really
Mhm.
hard for us who are so used to New York and Broadway in the US to really
Right.
get our minds around that London is totally different than Japan, totally different than
Mhm.
Australia, and like how they
Right.
watch theater, absorb theater. It's different. So I think we're only one part of the market. And I think it's so important to remember that there are theater fans and theater
Mhm.
watchers everywhere.
Yeah, for sure. And I was like listing so many notes while you were talking about your story, and I love that Smash is such an integral part of your theater education because it is for so many, and it's like proving itself in the sense that it's coming to Broadway next year, and the popularity of it has sustained itself since 2012 when it was on TV. So 12 years ago, we're going to be 13 years ago, the demand for it is just as high as it was then, which you can rarely say about IP sometimes, like for, not disparaging them, but like Back to the Future came to Broadway and people were like excited, people are nostalgic about Back to the Future, but not to this like culty, we demand tickets to the closed rehearsal level obsession with Smash.
I feel so fortunate to be on the co-producing team for Smash coming to Broadway. And again, it's one of those full circle moments in my career. And I'm so lucky to have had so many full circle moments. And you're absolutely right. I think Smash is so unique in that they haven't announced casting, they haven't announced the
Mhm.
theater. Nothing's really been put out there, but the following on social media and the way people have been
Yeah.
clamoring about the Broadway production of Smash is so
Mhm.
unique and unlike any other show. People
Mhm.
want to know, people are interacting on social media, they're having conversations, they're making references to the TV show, they're making
Yeah.
references to that open rehearsal, which was such a brilliant way for the show to get feedback. Because I think the show is exciting, or the musical is exciting because, you know, I think the entire creative team realizes we're not on TV anymore. We're on a
Mhm.
stage. And so you can't replicate what was done on TV on the
Right.
stage. You have to adapt it. And so I think they're being really smart about capturing the essence of Smash and making a musical, which is what Smash is all about. And I'm so excited about what's going to come and what people are going to see in the spring. It's going to be great.
Did we talk about the fact that we're both on this project together? I don't think we have.
Yeah,
Like,
I
don't
knew it,
think.
but I don't think we've actually spent time talking about it. Yeah.
So I'm so pumped. This is the second thing that we're doing together. Yay.
I love it. I love it. See,
So
great minds think alike.
it's like and we know where it's at, where the party is. So, but that's awesome, and it's true. Like I want to go back to your point about parents that are immigrants and being in the Asian, South Asian diaspora, and like not being in that culture of like going to theater and knowing what theater is, and like like theater at
Yeah.
school and like all that stuff. Like, because
I
I'm like you.
remember I remember distinctly two like early theater experiences. One, I actually remember I think I was 12. I had done all the
Yeah,
research about finding like a child acting agent. I was a Disney
it's
Channel kid. I was
awesome.
like, I'm gonna do this. And I can't
Yeah.
remember what my mom said to me, but she said it in such a way that it didn't crush my dreams, but it turned me away from it so well. And I wish I knew what she said because I didn't pick it up again. But somehow
Yeah.
she like got me off that path. And it wasn't because she was like anti-arts. She
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
just like, I don't know anyone, like, I don't know this world. How do I
Hmm.
navigate this world from Northern Virginia? Like, what
Right.
is this? Like, what does that even mean to be a child acting? Like, it's just so
Yeah.
foreign. And I remember the first professional theater I saw was my dad got us tickets to the tour of The Lion King.
Oh,
And
nice.
a lot of
Yeah.
people always talk about their first theater experience. For many, it's The Lion King or Beauty and the Beast or Wicked. And they talk about how life-changing it was for them. I
Hmm.
don't know if I would say me seeing The Lion King was life-changing. I loved it
Sure.
from what I
Yeah.
can remember. And I remember it was really cool. It was me and my mom riding the elevator down to the parking garage, and the
Hmm.
young Simba was there with their parents. And
Oh,
we were having
nice.
a conversation. So you would think after that experience, I see that kid,
Hmm.
I could picture myself like maybe that could be me, but that wasn't where my mind
Yeah.
was going at all. Like it wasn't this
Sure.
life-changing experience. And I even saw two Broadway shows through a school field trip in middle school, and I loved
Hmm.
it. And it made me really motivated to do theater in high school, which kind of changed to a cappella. But I don't know if it like I wouldn't say until the first time I saw Waitress in 2016, I call that my
Yeah.
gateway musical. I don't know until
Gotcha. Love
then
it.
did I really feel like I had that life-changing theatrical experience that pivoted
Hmm.
how my life was going to turn out. I
Yeah.
don't think it was until that point. And so, like,
Gotcha.
again,
Hmm.
I never had those experiences growing up. And I think, you know, unfortunately, a lot of regional theaters are struggling right now. And
Hmm.
part of it is, they're only doing outreach. They only can do outreach to the people that they know of who have
Yeah.
interacted with them. And there are theater fans like me living miles away who don't even know they exist. And so there's a
Right.
disconnect there that no one's really figured out how to solve because we're
Hmm.
hungry for theater. They're hungry for us to come see their theater, but that
Yeah.
somehow it's just not happening. And so I know it's
For
something
sure.
that folks are trying to figure out, but I think it's so true, especially for immigrants who like
Hmm.
you're focused on survival and getting into schools and getting into jobs and things like that. Going to see theater is not the top priority.
Yeah, I agree. It's like when I went to two very different schools. I went to a Pittsburgh public school from K through 5 for elementary. It was predominantly people of color. And then went to a private school for 6th through 12th grade, which was predominantly white. And when I got to 6th grade, I realized very quickly kind of the culture that my classmates had grown up in. And there are all these kids who are like referencing Rent, and like Rent was like their thing, and like Les Mis, and like, those shows. And I remember being like, I don't know what that is. Like, what are you talking about? Because my parents didn't take me to theater because they didn't know to do that. And like, if I were to remember my first theatrical experience, it was my parents taking me to Power Rangers Live. Okay. And like that I remember that. But like, in terms of theater, like same thing, Lion King, but it was with my ninth grade class trip. We like saw it in Toronto. And so that's the first like actual Broadway level musical that I remember. And it wasn't even with my parents. So I think we, as kind of the first gen in this country, part of our responsibility is to, whether it's our kids or other kids that are in our communities, to really welcome them into this world somehow. And I think us being producers and you doing the work that you do, it's important and it's impactful because it touches that responsibility, because you're
It's
like,
so
okay, I'm going
real.
to change these lives,
It,
and not
it's
in a
a
self-serving kind of, you know Book of Mormon kind of way, but like you're actually out there doing the honest work because you believe in it.
Yeah, 100%. And it's, one, are you creating things that other communities want to even see to begin with? But two,
Mhm.
my parents would love to taken me to more shows in DC. I'm sure, especially at the Kennedy Center. But
Right.
then it's ticket prices on top of that. I knew,
Yeah.
I
Right.
knew about Wicked. I remember, I don't know why I knew Wicked was a thing, but it was one of those
Hmm.
shows that just kind of got into the cultural zeitgeist and people just knew
Yeah.
about it. And like, I wasn't even a
Hmm.
theater kid that would have known anything else about it, but somehow I knew about this show when I was touring in DC. I remember hearing the radio ads and like, oh, we should go. And then we just never made time for it. But, even now when I take my parents to theater, I don't
Hmm.
even tell them to ticket prices because I know like they're just
Right.
instinctually going to be like, oh, no, you don't have to spend that money. Don't worry about it
Yeah.
because it can get really expensive very
Hmm.
quickly for a family of four or
For sure.
more. And so just thinking to my experience, I can get why dropping
Hmm.
$300 to $400 or more to take a
Yeah.
family of four to the theater was not top of mind because that isn't go to the movie theater instead. Anything more
Right.
is more affordable
Right.
than that.
Hmm. Absolutely. And so it's, you went like just like you when I take my parents to shows or they come to shows that I produce or that I'm in, the accessibility point still comes up. Even though they've had their jobs, they're retired now, they're good. They're still like, what do you mean this ticket's $55? Like what is that about? And I'm just like, well, it pays for artists and things. And it's that what to your point earlier about like trying to understand the world. And I think just like what you're talking about your mom, like my parents were the same too. It's not that they were like shitting on our dreams, which is the comedic point that lots of comedians make when they're Asian and talk about their parents. It's more about that. It's the non-understanding of like what I know is I'm here to make money and to have a job, and I want my child to be successful. All I know is either I don't know anybody in that crowd, which is what your mom communicated, or they do know someone and they're not successful, and they kind of project the idea of like you're going to be a poor starving artist forever if you do this. Why would you
Because
do
I
that?
I think the idea of being a working creative, the
Hmm.
idea that there are levels to that is
Right.
foreign to folks. You either
Hmm.
make it big, you're on Broadway, you're
Right.
on Hollywood in the big cinema screens, or you're not
Hmm.
working, and it's I
Right.
didn't realize even until the past few years that they're different. Like you can have a successful career as a
Hmm.
creative or an actor and not be working at the highest, most commercial levels. And I
Hmm.
think that concept is
Yeah.
just unknown to folks
It's
because why
weird
would
to
they know it if
people.
all they see are the highest
Right.
commercial levels?
Exactly. Like that you can be a normal person who has an everyday life and all you do is you do commercials or background work and teach classes and things like that. And that's Pete doesn't compute sometimes of being like that's what a job in the arts looks like 98% of the time. Like people that you see in TV and movies that you see on Broadway, that is the very small percentage of folks that, and we're not going to say made it, we're going to say just got to that part of our industry. And because it's all different, also it's all relative. You can't you sometimes you're not in that part forever either. Things change,
Absolutely.
you move on to other things or the different side of stuff, whether you're an actor turned producer, vice versa, whichever.
Welcome, everyone, to Podcast 616, the official podcast of Earth 616. I am your host, Damon Royster, and I am inviting you to listen and subscribe to this Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast. On Podcast 616, we gather some of today's greatest comedians, writers, and actors to dive deep into all things Marvel, like comic book history and lore, all the interconnected superhero storylines, and of course, who's hot and who's not in the MCU. Honestly, why aren't you listening right now? You have the power to listen to Podcast 616. And as we always say, with great power comes even greater responsibility. Listen and subscribe to Podcast 616 wherever you get your podcasts.
What's up, everyone? Chase Smith here, host of the Chase Smith Podcast, and my podcast reflects who I am. My hobbies, my interests, my passions, my curiosities, my careers, my questions, and my family. I'll spend time talking about all types of sports, movies, TV shows, trending news stories, and other cultural events, and even faith. This is who I am, and I hope I can get to know you as well. Join me on the Chase Smith Podcast, and let's have some thought-provoking conversations, only on the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hi, I'm Anant Das, and you're listening to Producing While Asian.
So there's a question I ask everybody, and it kind of connects to the question after that. And it's so, people ask a question like on a scale of 1 to 10, this or the other. I usually ask on the scale of one, meaning not at all, to producer, where do you sit and why? And then after you answer that question, talk to us a little bit about your producing process. Like from how do you pick a project to be part of? What is your kind of, and this sounds so like, LA girly, but like what is your like producing brand that you like follow and like kind of your personal mission in terms of the pieces that you work with. So start with your scale. Where do you identify on this spectrum
Yeah,
of producers?
100% a 10. I am a
Cool.
producer,
Love it.
and I think, it's such an interesting question because I think two things come to mind. One, what even is a producer? Most
Correct.
folks, even working in the industry, don't know who are.
Hmm.
And then two, what does it even mean to be on a scale of like 1 to 10 when
Yeah.
you think about producing? And it's such an interesting question because I think when I first started Broadway boxed up, and then when I first started, getting into the producing world, I had a lot of hesitation to call myself like part of the industry
Hmm.
because it felt like I hadn't
Yeah.
done anything, or like I thought that was, that was a term for like actors or like who am I? Like what? This isn't my
Sure.
industry yet. And then, at some point, I just kind of took ownership of it. And I remember I have a great friend, Mary Page Nance. She's a fabulous actor. She runs a wonderful small business. I had a conversation with her, and she was just like, "Hell yeah, you're in the industry, of
Yeah.
course. Like, what are you talking about? This is our industry." And I remember like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, no, you're right. What are you talking about? Of course, it is our industry." And I kind of think about the same things as a producer. I think the hard thing with the word producer is it doesn't mean any one thing.
Right.
And it changes so much based on context. Whether you're in
Hmm.
theater, whether you're in film, whether you're in commercial theater or nonprofit theater, the fact that like within a Broadway show, you have an associate producer, an executive producer, a lead
Right.
producer, a co-producer that are four very, very different, though
Right.
overlapping
Yeah.
and similar things.
Hmm.
And that the word executive producer means something totally different in film than it does in
Yes.
theater. It's a very
Mhm.
confusing thing for people in the industry, let alone for people outside of it. I always say, I think a producer at its core is someone who creates and connects. I definitely consider myself a producer. I've been fortunate to be a co-producer on Broadway, an associate producer in London, currently an executive producer of a few projects, been able to be an executive producer in film as well. And also, I think of myself as a creative producer on certain projects as well, because I think to me, that's the fun part, being in the room, being creative, making those connections and doing the creative work as well and developing.
Mhm.
But I can understand, if folks haven't worked at the highest level or haven't gotten
Sure.
that credit, are they a
Hmm.
producer? And then, it can also be sometimes funny. You put producer in your bio, and it's like, what does that mean if I don't have the credits or I haven't been a lead
Right.
producer of a show? Like, am I misrepresenting myself? And I think it's, I think it's not about misrepresenting. I think it's understanding what you are and what you can do and what you're interested in, and
Mhm.
making sure you're communicating that with different folks.
Totally. Like I look at producing as like you're very good at organizing. Like you're very good at organizing and like you said, connecting with people and also getting yelled at. Like those are your three like top tier job duties. And it that I feel like I've seen that that's kind of the one thread, at least from my experience that I see across whether it's film, TV, theater, music, even because like it is all different. And like maybe we've stumbled upon our mission, Ananth. Like we have to write a book that's like these are the different producers. It's like a producer's dictionary. Like this is what it means per industry, per, part genre, all that
A
stuff. Because
hundred
there really
percent.
isn't. Like I know there's some schools that are starting to have producing programs like Columbia. There are textbooks, I think, but there's one book that, oh my gosh, I can't remember the name right now. I'll look it up. But there's a book called I Want to Be a Producer.
Yes, I
Oh
know what you're
man, it's
talking
a
about.
very famous person in producing who wrote it, and it's killing me that I can't remember the name right now. But like that book gave a lot of insight into what it means to be a producer. It was partly a biography, but like or autobiography, but it was helpful because there's no other textbooks that are really out there about
And
it
I
or the
think it's hard, and I
experience.
don't know if there ever will be a good textbook, because at least in my eyes, and I come from a very commerce point of view about it, but I view every film, every Broadway show as a startup company. And I think,
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
back to like my interest in startups earlier that I mentioned, I think that's why I really love that lead producing role, because you are the CEO, you're the change
Right.
maker, but you are also the leader, kind of having your toes
Mhm.
dipped, or can have your toes dipped in every function. And like every
Right.
CEO runs their company different, every lead producer will run their Broadway
Mhm.
show or film differently, but you
Right.
really are the entrepreneur in many ways, or can be the
Mhm.
entrepreneur in many ways. And I think that becomes really hard to learn from a book until you've done it
Yeah.
and continue to do it.
It was John Breglio who wrote that book.
Yes.
And so it's, yeah, John, if you're listening to this podcast, come on the podcast. So anyway, all of that is valid points, because it's, I feel like when you produce, it's almost like a baptism by fire. And I use that a lot because like when I came into Here Lies Love last year, that was my first. And like, I had a general idea, of producing because I did an off-Broadway opportunity before and all that. But like I had nobody has any idea until you jump into it, the nuances of producing in general, but then also at the Broadway level. Like I can see why it's not for everyone and why somebody will go in and do one and be like, all right, I'm good. Or the opposite, where somebody goes in and is like, I want to do 8 shows at once, like, let me at it. So it's very different per person. So what is your process when you're weighing projects and even investments, even like how do you really make a choice? Because there's, granted, it's happened to me, I'm sure it's happened to you. As soon as you did your first one, suddenly everybody's at your door being like, hey, can you do this? Do you want to do that? Are you interested in this? And so you're just like, oh my God. Like, and I learned that the hard way this year, where I said I like Shonda Rhimes yesed it and then paid the price, where I was like, I can't do all of that. So how do you arrive at your decisions?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And before I answer that, I'm just gonna go to
Mhm.
your yesing point. Yeah, that becomes really hard, especially now. I feel like new producers are seemingly hounded more regarding new projects than ever before. And I think
Yeah.
it's just one, there's a quantity of more new projects, but also theaters looking for new money. They need new money to sustain itself. And who's bringing in
Mhm.
new money? New producers who haven't been in the industry for 10, 20 years. And so it becomes this really hard thing to like, there's always another project that you really, really want to do. But yeah, my process for kind of picking projects, it's always evolving, always evolving. I don't think there's any one checklist, but I've been really fortunate even over the past week or two meeting new people. They've kind of made comments to me once they've learned about what shows I'm doing that like I essentially have a brand of sorts. Or
Sure.
like
Yeah.
they're like, oh, that makes sense that you would be a part of this show. Or like even just
Mhm.
the other day, someone I had just met learning I was part of two different shows. They're like, oh, that's awesome. That makes so much sense. Like you would want to do these cutting edge shows in this way. And like
Mhm.
that made me really happy that like people were
Yeah.
recognizing that I kind of have a brand. And so my process, it's interesting because I think there are a few things. And I purposefully like to operate in the commercial theater sector for a couple of reasons. One, it's a place where like commercial theater needs producers to precipitate change. And so I think it's
Mhm.
an aspect where I can come in and hopefully precipitate that change as a producer. But also, I think commercial theater is really unique in that it's able to have a lot of eyes on it and create and influence
Mhm.
stories and influence people. And I that really excites me about it. When I'm thinking about a commercial theater project, I think there are a few different things. I think most of the shows I'm involved with typically have, to put it very broadly, some sort of diversity element. And that
Mhm.
might not always be obvious. Obviously, I've done shows that have an all black cast or an all Asian cast or seven autistic actors in it,
Mhm.
or have done shows that deal with other, DEI related topics to kind of just sum
Mhm.
it up. And so, that's important to me, whether in the subject matter, whether in the creative team, etc. That's always something top of mind. Even shows that maybe aren't as obviously about a diverse subject, is casting diverse? Are we hiring people of different sizes and different backgrounds, or what is the process like? And so, like, that's one thing that's important to me. Two, it varies on the show, and I think success in commercial theater can be defined very differently. Some people view success as getting a Tony Award. Some people view
Mhm.
success as just getting the art out there. at this scale. And some people view success as commercially successful and that their investors recoup, people made their money back. And while I try to typically find projects that are financially viable and I think that are commercially viable, there are a handful of projects I've picked, where I wasn't really 100% convinced, but it was really important for me to get this story out there. And my investors also agreed, like, we want this story out there, even if we won't make money out of it. And so I think that was sometimes part of my decision-making process. And also, I've been fortunate to produce and been on co-producing teams for so many shows now, working with good people. For me, theater and the reason I'm a creative is about the human connection. And so for me, I really want to be with collaborators that I enjoy working with. And I've been really fortunate to now have worked long enough and in so many projects that I figured out, one, who I really enjoy working with and who are good people. And on the flip side, who I really don't want to work with again because I have not enjoyed the experience or have not felt valued or taken care of for a variety of reasons. And so, it's not any one reason necessarily. It's kind of a mixture of all of those things. But I always, try to look for shows that are pushing theater, pushing the arts. And I think about shows like Here Lies Love. Here Lies Love ticked a lot of boxes for me, but just the immersive experience was so important to me and like what it was creating and how it was redefining what theater could be. Or I think about shows that I've gotten involved with, like Job or other musicals. I'm really interested in Swept Away because both Job and Swept Away are two of the most intense pieces of theater I've seen in my life. One a play and one a musical, and like I think that's really pushing what theater can be, and that really excites me. I think there are some shows that maybe seem nothing's a given, but some shows I could get involved with that maybe seem like a more surefire commercial hit, but I don't feel like it's hitting any other bucket. So maybe it's not for me, or I don't really like the messaging of the show. I've done 6 Broadway shows so far. I have 3 or 4 more coming up. I'm at a point in my career where pretty much for most shows, I can pick up a phone. I probably know the lead producer and know someone who does and say, hey, I really want to be involved with this show and I want to raise money for it or invest in it. And I could probably get on that show. And it's a really humbling position to be in. So like now I'm really trying to find things that align with those values and really are both pushing the industry forward, pushing the conversation forward, and also have some sort of commercial viability, hopefully.
Sure. That's awesome. And I feel very close to that process that you talk about because it's, I'm still fairly early in the Broadway circles, but it's kind of the same philosophy that I had in projects below that level. It's kind of like like I'm looking for something that's different, something that's cutting edge, but also that touches DEI in some sort, but also lifts the underrepresented voices, because we're tired of seeing the stories that we see all the time. And I don't need to say what it is, but like we're ready to see and hear from other people, the same people that have the same amount, breathe the same amount of air in our world society, but for some reason have been ignored for a long time, or at least or don't have the same equity as a specific part of our artistic industry. And so you're at Smash. Tell us a little bit about, and you mentioned it a couple of times now, and we'll kind of weave back into producing topics, but how did producing tie into Broadway on Broadway Box? And like there was a connection that you were talking about, like you could reach out to people, but kind of how is this company also assisting your being a producer, like, or it could be completely different and it's something else.
No,
that's
a
not
great
the
question.
stress of raising money, like, how does that fit into your bigger mosaic of you and your career?
Yeah, Broadway Boxed Up evolved into this thing that I didn't know it would become. I truly thought, once theater is back from the pandemic, there would be an interest, and the interest has kept growing for a variety of reasons. One, that there are a lot of folks like me growing up who do not live near a major city, who don't have access to theater, and I'm their lifeline to theater. But a big mission of ours at Broadway Boxed Up is to elevate voices in the theater industry. And we do a lot of focus on BIPOC voices, on deaf and hard of hearing voices, on other underrepresented voices and institutions and organizations. And really we're trying to delve more into like the theater education world, and we're big supporters of various nonprofits like BEA, Broadway Education Alliance, and Broader Than Broadway, another new education related nonprofit. And For me, I think it's made me a better producer because it grounds me and reminds me, like, what do audiences actually think about? We're in such a bubble in New York, one,
Hmm.
but two, I think, we forget that audiences aren't consuming information as rapidly as we are as New York City
Yeah.
producers. And
Hmm.
like it's funny, even I get like, daily emails from various news sources every morning. And a lot of those news things are already old because I already saw it yesterday during the day. It's
Yeah.
like I'm getting
Hmm.
information so rapidly now. But I have to remember, not all of our audience members are, nor do they necessarily care to that degree.
Yeah.
And it grounds
Yeah.
me and it reminds me, like, what are audiences actually aware of? What do they like? What are they interested in? What demographics like certain shows or certain
Hmm.
things about certain shows or certain types of
Right.
merchandise products? And I think it's really a lot of great data as well, because unfortunately, Broadway shows, we don't really know our audiences.
Right.
That data is owned by the ticketing companies. Unless they
Hmm.
opt in or we collect that data in some way, shape, or form, we don't actually know all of our
Yeah.
audience members. And so what's really cool about Broadway Boxed Up is, not only do I know the audience, I know geographically where they live, I know what shows they like. It's a really cool
Hmm.
experience, but also it's humbling, and it reminds me why I do this in the first place. I was at Broadway Con last year and I got to meet so many subscribers in person for the first time.
Oh, wow. That's
And
cool.
it was, we bonded over shows, and so many of them told me how it connected them with family members. One was a grandfather and his granddaughter, and they kind of share the box
Wow.
together and they connect over it. And it was just so powerful
Wow.
for me. It reminds me, why I do this company and why
Hmm.
theater, and specifically theater merchandise, can help connect people. Instances like that really motivate me, but and it remind me, why I create theater and why do I produce and why do I still
Right.
want to do this time and time again. So
Hmm.
Broadway Box Up, I think, is an integral part, and it's been great because we branched out into doing one-off pieces for various Broadway and off-Broadway shows. We've started doing merchandise lines for various shows, and it's been a great way to expand and offer more creative thinking and kind of the merchandise engagement space for different shows.
Yeah. And that's so cool that you are directly impacting families and conversations that they're having. Like if there's a young person in a flyover state who is in a very not anti, but like not a very friendly LGBTQ community, and they get a box that has a bunch of LGBTQ positive shows in it, and they open it at their dining table, it like starts a conversation. And and that's what theater does. That's why it's art. Art causes change. And so I love that it's like it's connected, but it's still its own thing, and that's incredible. So congratulations on that.
Thank
How
you.
old is Broadway Boxed Up?
We started October 2020, so about 4 years
Amazing.
now.
Yeah, oh my gosh,
Every
you're gonna
month.
have a
It's been
fifth
wild.
anniversary soon. That's so exciting. I'm gonna sign up for year 5 because I'm sure it's gonna be out of this world.
Thank
That
you.
that's so cool.
Hello, Brooks here with the Books with Brooks monthly book club podcast. Listen, it is beyond time for you to join a book club. I know you've been thinking about it, and everyone's doing it. Here's how Books with Brooks works. We read one book a month, and then we talk about it. Classics like Stephen King's The Shining, debut novels like We Are the Brennans by Tracy Lang, and tons of other compelling, life-changing stories, one book and 1 month at a time. So come read along with us and then listen in.
Hi, I'm Anant Das, and you're listening to Producing While Asian.
In your career so far, do you have any memorable challenges that you faced that you'd like to share with people that they might benefit from hearing that story? And then on the opposite side, do you have any milestones that you're like, not only was it amazing, but like, I can't believe that happened. And, I hope that, something that you hope would be a milestone for somebody else as well in the same community. Start with a challenge, start like a thorn, and then go to a rose and tell us something great.
Yeah, no, great question. Producing is hard. It is freaking hard. And
It's so
it's
hard.
funny.
Yeah.
It's so, even as a co-producer, it's so
Hmm.
hard.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I think we're really good as co-producers in making it look easy because
Right.
we often show off the success of it. And I
Mhm.
think, and I think that's why, you might get pitched all these shows from all these writers or be pitched all the time. And like people are like, oh, you've done so many shows. Look how successful you are. Help me with
Right.
mine. And it's like, I'd love to, but it's
Mhm.
hard. It's time consuming.
Yeah.
I had a
Right.
friend recently helping with a project, working on the project, and we were doing outreaches and they were
Mhm.
sending a couple hundred emails and they were just talking about how like time consuming and exhausting it was, and I was just
Yeah.
thinking like same, literally this is what I
Yeah.
do. I send thousands of
Right.
emails and maybe get like a handful of response. That is what
Yeah.
producing,
Right.
like not
Mhm.
glamorous side of it is hard, and it's frustrating because progress is not even either, especially if you're on the
Yeah.
fundraising side. You
Mhm.
could be responsible for $250,000. You're going to be at zero for 6 months, and then suddenly you might get two investors to bring you to 100K, and that's motivating. But for six
Mhm.
months, you're like, shoot, shoot, shoot. I need to find
Yeah.
this money. People aren't
Yeah.
responding. What am I doing wrong? What can I do? And it's
Mhm.
it's it's hard. It's exhausting. And that doesn't even get to the parts of producing that are actually like strategy and managing the show and being responsible
Yeah.
for all these people and their livelihood. That's just even
Mhm.
just to get the show up financially to begin with. And
Right.
so
Mhm.
I think people forget that producing is hard, especially co-producing, especially when you're not able to just write the check yourself, or you don't come
Yeah.
from a background like many of the producers of color that I know of, where
Lots
you
of
can
us.
just call five people and get five checks and be
Right.
done.
Right. I'm so like when someone was like, "Yeah, I finished my raise in like a month." I was like, "What?" Like, cool. And I'm like, I'm still over here doing my thing. But yeah, it's for sure. Like that's a huge challenge. Like it's a challenging job. And people they yeah, you're right. They only see the good side. They're like, "Oh wow, they did this, they did that."
Yeah, look,
Um,
they're announcing another show, they're on another red
mhm,
carpet. Look at that.
yeah, right. Mhm,
And it's not only is it hard, but it's exhausting. I think a
yeah,
lot of folks don't remember or don't realize that most producers, depending on the type of producer, obviously there are a million types, but like
sure.
many producers are not producers full time,
Right.
in that they're not
Mhm,
financially sustaining themselves with this for a variety of reasons, but partly because
mhm.
depending on the type of producing you do, it really doesn't pay you anything,
Right.
you
It's not
know?
your money. It's like you're like this money you're finding is going to
Right.
the project and you're not even a budget line. Like
Right. Yeah.
you
And so
don't get a
you're
paycheck.
hoping it's going to be
Yeah.
successful and like you can actually get
Hmm.
paid for those hundreds of hours you're putting in, but
Right.
you have to find other ways to sustain yourself. So oftentimes people are doing one or two full-time jobs before they even get to the producing part. And
Hmm.
so, people are also already exhausted by the time they get to it. So it's really difficult to continually find motivation. It's going to ebb and flow. And I think, that's the unglamorous part of producing that people forget. It's hard. It's not glamorous. It's, obviously like there are worse things to be doing, and we're really fortunate to be able to do so. I don't mean to
Hmm.
sound not filled with
Right.
gratitude,
Right.
but like
Hmm.
it's exhausting. And so sometimes when people, I'm not responding as quickly, I'm like, this is my fourth email inbox I'm going through. I'm sorry, y'all.
Yeah. Yeah.
After two full-time jobs, I'll get to it, I
Mhm.
promise. But like, please have grace with me.
And you like
But there have
forget
been
who you
so
talked to
many,
last. And you're like, did I say you're
right?
like, did I tell you that? Like, I don't know.
I'm
So
very
yeah.
good at reading emails on my phone and being like, I'll respond on my laptop, and then never opening my
Mhm.
email on my laptop.
Yeah, same, right there with you. But yeah, it's a challenge. It's a hard thing. And like Megan Ann told me, she was like, if it was easy, everybody would do it. And
That
so the
that
fact
is
that we're hanging
so
in
real.
there is good. Yeah, it's so
So real.
real.
Wow.
And I remember her, I hear her voice in my head anytime I have a challenge with our Spells of the Sea project. And I'm just like, yes, that's right. This no means like, I have other places to go with this, but like most people would hear no and they'll walk away and they're like, and they're over it.
Wow.
And
That just
so,
motivated me right now again. If it was
right?
easy, everyone would do it. Wow.
Mm-hmm. Sees everyone do it.
Yeah.
And it's that gratitude of like, I can do it. I'm doing it, and so I'm there. And so is it frustrating? Yes. Super, like the most frustrating. But once you get to that yes or get to that investor or whichever, and the other thing that I'm learning in producing is that, or at least for theater, is that deadlines are like semi-real. Like deadlines are real, but they're semi-real because it's like you have like a date and then there's like another date and then there's like another date and you're like, oh, okay. And so I learned that, because it is motivating. I see the strategy because as a baby co-producer, I was like, this is a deadline. I must do this. And then I'm like, oh my God, I'm not going to find this person by this deadline. And then I get the news that like actually the deadline is a week later, but like that's just our initial
I
thing.
found more often than not
Mhm.
on a show,
Mhm.
you are never the only person who's having whatever roadblock you're facing.
Right. Right.
I've been part of a show that, one roadblock was we had literally no information about the show to present and
Yeah.
to potential investors, but we needed to raise money for it. And I had a conversation with the team on that show being like, hey, this is actually really difficult to do because I'm getting questions, and I understand as an investor myself and as a
Mhm.
co-producer who wants my investors to feel confident in their investment, I understand why they want more information.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was
That's
able to
smart.
work it out with those lead producers to be able to get some more information to provide for them, or get an extension or something. It worked out where we were able
Yeah.
to get the investors the information they needed and still make all the deadline. But no, you're so right.
Mhm.
You're so real
Yeah.
about that.
And that's absolutely true. Like the missing information part is so difficult because investors are smart. They are smart people. And like I was okay at math in school, but like these investors are like, I want to know this and this and this. And I'm like, okay, but when you're actually missing a document because say a theater's not booked, say there's no pricing set yet, you have to find these like models based on air that you're like, this is what it could be, please give me $100,000. They're
Yep.
like, and they're like, okay.
But all this to say, there
Yeah.
have been a lot of like really great moments too. On the flip side, I kind of talked about like how I've been so lucky to have so many full circle moments, and I think the
Mhm.
first moment really is in my
Mhm.
career, consistently in this industry, I have been at a point where I can look back a year and be like, wow, where I am today, I would have done almost
Yeah.
anything to be at a year ago, 2 years ago. Like
Mhm.
when I first started
Yeah.
out, just to be in a Broadway playbill would have been like my number
Mhm.
one goal. And like I could have like
Yeah.
retired then type of thing. And
Yeah.
not to make a smash reference, and they just keep moving the line. And it's true,
Mhm.
your line just
Yeah.
keeps moving,
Yeah.
but and it's easy
Yeah.
to not be gracious about it or have gratitude. And but so many full circle moments, from the ones I talked about earlier about being behind the white table in
Mhm.
a rehearsal room, to attending my first opening night for
Yeah.
Kinky Boots off Broadway.
Mm.
And that show was really special to me because that was the first Broadway show that I went to by myself in New York. And so like it held a special heart. Like I just had
Yeah.
afternoon free.
Oh.
I'm like, I'm gonna
Mhm.
buy a ticket, and that was really special to me. Or to be part of Here Lies Love, because not only is it an old Asian cast, but Jose Yana went
Mhm.
to my high school, and he was kind of a legend in my
Oh,
high
that's
school.
awesome.
The guy who
Yeah.
made it in the industry. And I remember in choir classes, people would
That's
talk about
cool.
him like, oh, this guy was in our choir once
Yeah.
many, many years ago, and he made it. And like,
That's
it was
cool.
so full circle to be part of that, and to be part of the producing team on Smash as after that show.
Mhm.
Like, I
Yeah.
wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for that TV show. And so,
Right.
that's such a full circle moment. Or, I have a few projects coming up where I'm working with artists and actors that I have admired and respected and have been
Mhm.
inspired by for years and years and years. And so those full circle moments just keep coming and coming. And it's so fortunate. I'm so lucky to be able to do that, but also finding ways to continually create more human connection. I think a
Mhm.
lot of my
Yeah.
producing I'm realizing moving forward is I don't want to produce and this be hands off. I want to be able to have that connection with people
Mhm.
involved. And I think that's really important to me, because that's, to me, how I
Sure.
can feel more gracious about it, have more gratitude about it, and really feel like fulfilled with it.
Mhm.
And so, finding those opportunities, getting to know the people involved with the production better, both on the stage and off the stage, I think that's been so wonderful and amazing. And it's been great.
Yeah.
These are amazing folks who are part of the village to put a Broadway show up. And it's been awesome to be able
Mhm.
to form connections with them.
Yeah. And just to that point, just like how many people it takes. Like when we took our like kind of class photo after a closing of Here Lies Love, like, and that wasn't even everybody. It was already like hundreds of people. And you're like, Yeah, and people don't think that. They think it's just the cast, the director, and like a stage manager and like the musicians. They're like, that's a Broadway show, right? And it's like, no, no, it's like the house staff, the ushers, your market, like all your different teams that you've had, your marketing team, whatever, whatever. It's just like so many people. And then you get into film, and that's a whole nother thing. But it's like, there's so much, and it's like what we talked about earlier. It is people's jobs, it's their livelihood, it's what they do, and it's an industry that comes with so many challenges. Like, money is the biggest one, of course, but it's like there's challenges all over. So, but yeah, I appreciate that you're one of the ones that is hanging in there and making change and sitting at the table, because that's so important. Like I saw, this wasn't even that long ago, there were some things that happened at theaters, and we don't have to put it back in the zeitgeist, but like decisions that were made that were not great. And it's like, if somebody that looked like me was sitting at that table, that might have not happened, because it slips past because people don't get the call out of like, actually that's like racist, like, or actually that's like not really helpful or good in this time.
I think folks have forgotten or never really realized or experienced like why the diversity and inclusion is so important. It's not simply about having an Asian person in the room for the sake of having an Asian person in the room.
Right.
It's truly, if you really have diversity in a variety of elements, including in experiences and backgrounds, you are going to be able to hear different ideas and hopefully get the best one by combining those ideas or bouncing off each other. And I think we forget that a lot. I think a lot of my success in this industry, it actually stems from the fact that I think differently than so many other folks, primarily because, I didn't have the typical education that a lot of people in the theatrical and film industry have had to get to where they come. And it's not to say that I think better than them or they think better than me. It's just that we think differently because we've been trained to think differently. So we're going to have different points of view. And that just adds to a more productive conversation. And I think we forget, that's really why, or that's one of the big reasons why diversity is so beneficial and so important. It's not simply about having the Asian person sit at the table as a pretty face, And I think I think a lot of times we're not seeing that, or we're not realizing that, or folks are not really recognizing the importance of that.
Definitely. Speaking of Jose Lana, I spoke to a gentleman who I guess is the drama teacher at your high school, who taught Jose back in the day. And I don't know if he was still there when you were there, maybe.
I don't think so.
And I can't recall his name right now, but I was on the phone with him, and he was saying, "Oh yeah, I'm from the DC area, blah blah blah." And he was like, my one story is that I didn't cast Jose Lana in a musical, and here he is, being who he is. And I was like, you were a lesson, okay? You were a lesson. You taught him something. Like, we're just gonna go there. And so, but yeah, it just probably made him work, even harder at what he wanted to do.
I love that. That's so funny.
But yeah, that's so cool that you guys went to the same high school. That's amazing.
No, and he's so great. He's been a friend, someone I've had conversations with, and an inspiration to me, because he grew up or started performing in the time when there are only so many shows an Asian actor could be in.
Yeah, he was a trailblazer.
The King and I's and Miss Saigons and all of those.
Yeah.
There are only a handful of shows, and you were kind of typecasted in those. So to see how he has had such an amazing and diverse career while breaking kind of molds of what Asian actors can do in theater has been so inspiring to me as a producer.
Yeah, and like he's part of the reason why I started as a musical theater actor. My voice teacher, and not, it sounds, the way it's going to sound, it sounds bad, but he basically was like, you're going to be asked to do certain things in audition rooms. So I'm going to need you to study Jose Lana and the roles that he's performed, and you're going to have to learn cuts of his songs. And so I spent a lot of time with Jose Lana's voice in a practice room, hearing him sing certain songs, just like you, full circle to come and work with him now and call him, a colleague and a friend is kind of, it's incredible, because he's a person too. And so he is the source of a lot of us in this industry. Like, he's, just like him, any other Asian actor or producer, whoever that you can name. But the reason why this show exists is because Asian producers are out there, but people don't know who they are. And so I'm excited to share your story, Anant, and get you out there and say like, hey, if you don't already know this person, here's a South Asian producer that you should be in touch with and maybe
Thank
make the
you.
next amazing Bollywood musical movie something,
Yeah,
or
that's
whatever it may be,
definitely a dream of mine. And to be real and frank on, and producing While Asian podcast, I think I'd be remiss not to say it's stressful being an Asian producer too, because
Yeah.
as in you saw from Here Lies Love, I'm sure,
Hmm.
while I was raising money for that show, I had people say to me, "Oh, well, Allegiance didn't really do commercial success on
Yeah.
Broadway. I don't know if I want
Yeah.
to invest in another Asian show." And
Mm.
it's like, Here Lies Love and Allegiance could not be more different for a variety of reasons. One, different
Yeah.
countries,
Yes. Right. First.
different
So,
timelines, different
hmm.
concept entirely of a musical. Like,
Hmm.
yes, history, but sure, like
Yeah.
many musicals are
Right.
history, but like they could not be more different. And
Hmm.
it's so difficult because one show not doing well, and you see this
Yeah.
across the board on Broadway.
Yeah.
Once
Yeah.
one show of a certain like subgenre doesn't do well, suddenly any show that even is like remotely
Slightly like
similar
it. Right.
is going to be
Right.
compared to it. And
Hmm.
it's frustrating because it makes
Yeah.
me anxious about when the next South Asian related show comes on Broadway or
Right.
makes it to Broadway or is fortunate enough to be
Hmm.
there.
Yeah. It just makes
Is
it that much
that
harder to fight for it, you know?
it makes it harder, and it also is, if that show doesn't succeed, I'm worried what that means for any other South Asian related show afterwards. And it's
Hmm.
difficult, like as you know, the Asian diaspora is so diverse. No one show is
Yeah.
ever going to represent everyone.
Right.
No,
Right.
even
Hmm.
I can confidently say no South Asian show is ever probably going to represent my experience necessarily compared to my
Hmm.
brothers, even. All
Yeah.
of us have such different experiences based on
Hmm.
where we were born, where we
Right.
grew up,
Hmm.
what part of Asia and what part of the
Yep.
countries we are come from.
Yeah.
It is so
Hmm.
geographical, just as diverse as the US is, and how someone in
Hmm.
Texas is going to have a very different experience than someone who grew up in Florida versus someone who grew up in Washington State versus DC versus New York.
Right.
All of our Asian
Hmm.
countries are just as diverse, and I think we forget
Yeah.
that. So even
Right.
like the
Right.
Indian musical, the next Indian musical to come is only going to represent or show story one
Just
of many,
one
many
part.
stories.
Right.
And so it's
Hmm.
it's stressful for me. And I like this is what keeps me up at night type of thing that like
Yeah.
if we don't like the next Asian musical isn't successful, how are people going to react to future ones down the line? And like, I think that's kind of the
Hmm.
work I'm trying to do in terms of one, not only help ensure that our stories are successful on stage, but
Hmm.
also that helping people realize that like our stories are important to be on stage regardless of whether they're commercially successful, and that there are many, many stories to tell, and it's not just one story.
Yeah.
And we have many, many stories in development right now to put on
Hmm.
commercial stages. And so that's kind of like what keeps me up at night, and what I'm kind of thinking about, what can I do as a producer
Hmm.
to kind of fight that notion that like just because one show didn't do well doesn't mean there can ever never be an Asian show again.
Right. And Here Lies Love came on the tails of K-pop. And so
Yes.
it was even more like people were like, well, K-pop lasted for a month. Like, well, how is this show going to do? And I'm like, Korea, Philippines, like different, like not the same,
And
but
what I will
also
say is
different shows.
I went to K-pop. Actually, K-pop was one of the most fun theater experiences. And I actually, before
I
K-pop,
really wanted to go. Yeah.
I saw a show that kind of made me lose faith in theater a little bit. It made me like not
Oh
want to see
no.
any more
Yeah.
theater. And then
Hmm.
went to K-pop and was dancing in my seat. I was jaw dropped. I was like, wow,
Yeah.
this is like one of the most fun shows I've ever been to. And it kind of made me re-fall in love with theater. So like I am so
Hmm.
grateful to K-pop the musical because like
Yeah.
I was so incredibly demotivated by this one show and embarrassed by
Hmm.
this one show that so many people were
Yeah.
experiencing, and I was just like this
Yeah.
cannot be a representation of our industry right now. So to have
Sure.
K-pop like reinvigorate that fire in me was really exciting.
Yeah, and I'm so sad that I missed it, and so I really hope that it comes back in some form somewhere in the world, because I will be there. I will be there to see it because I a good friend of mine, Eddie Lee, was in it, And so I would see his updates. I was like, oh, that's so cool. I didn't even know what was happening. And that's the other part. It's like the marketing side of things. Marketing an Asian show, quote unquote, is difficult. It's hard because, you get a lot of not pushback, but you get a lot of like raised eyebrows because they're like, well, what is this? And then they hark back to like, oh, is it Miss Saigon? Is it King and I? Is it, it's like things that they know, but they don't know that it's different. And so
Yeah,
the
Here
marketing
Lies
angle
Love
is
had some
hard.
success in that regard, in that, they were over indexing significantly on Asian people attending the show.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, I wasn't as plugged into like why, as in I knew some of the reasons why,
Hmm.
but I think about that a
Hmm.
lot for South Asian shows.
Yeah.
How are you, any South Asian show that reaches a commercial stage, how are you actually reaching to South Asian people who haven't been to the theater and convincing them to
Yeah.
spend this money to come to the theater? I think about that a lot, actually, and
Yeah.
I don't think it's been thought about enough, or
I
I'm
agree.
worried that it's
Hmm.
not going to be thought about soon enough to actually get the wheels in motion. But
Yeah.
that's totally something for me, top of mind. Any Asian show, really. How
Yeah.
are you really going to reach to those communities while simultaneously telling current theater goers that this is a show
Yeah.
they
That
need to
this
see
is
as well?
right. That this is interesting and you should come to the party. And, even though it's Tuesday, you should be at this immersive disco pop situation. Yeah. It's rough. And marketing isn't cheap. So like you have to make like Sophie's choice sometimes and be like, do I pour our money into digital ads or do I take a portion of that and put flyers on the LIRR? Like, clearly it
And I
was the
love the way you
digital
just
choice.
phrased that, because
Hmm.
I think sometimes we forget that advertising is a marketing tool.
Right.
Advertising
Hmm.
is it's one of many tools. I think
Hmm.
sometimes we're so advertising forward we actually forget about the marketing in theater
Hmm.
sometimes.
Right. Right.
Advertising is just one tool to market a show, and
Hmm. Hmm.
I just love the way you phrase that, so I appreciate that.
Thanks. And also like the different demographics that are on different platforms in different places. It's like I like Here Lies Love had our one-page New York Times ad, but you really think hard and you're like, okay, well, how many people have a paper subscription to the New York Times anymore? And it's like those little nuances that like the effort was there, but it was like, are the right people looking for that paper ad? Maybe. Like, it's not a yes, it's not a no, it's a maybe because news media and like where we consume our news and our like advertising is changing so much every year. Like we might not have paper newspapers in 5 years. They might all be gone. They might all be digital, but then these digital subscriptions are gate kept by very expensive subscriptions. I don't even have a New York Times digital subscription because I'm like, that shit's expensive. I'm like, no, like, give me the free articles or like, let me browse the headlines and then go Google it somewhere else. But
100%.
yeah. Hmm.
And it's so, just to hone in on Here Lies Love, because we were both
Hmm.
part of it. And,
Hmm.
I preface this with saying hindsight's 2020, of
Right.
course. And
Right. Hmm.
if we were able to restart and go back in time,
Yeah.
I
We
think
do
about some
better.
of the
Oh, yeah.
lessons there, and like, you know, I would have loved to consider branding it more similarly to how Cabaret at the Kit Kat Club is, because I think it
Sure.
really
Yeah.
was. It's not a Broadway show. It's the cool thing that all the 20 somethings need to be doing in New York.
Yeah.
Almost distance yourself from the fact that it's a Broadway show and just
Hmm.
have it a thing that just happens to be at a Broadway theater. And
Yeah.
and I know we really did try to do that, but now that
Hmm.
we've, if we were to restart with 2020
Right.
hindsight, how
Hmm.
can we do that more? So that is like the hot thing for everyone in their 20s and 30s to be doing.
Yeah.
And then,
It's that whole
maybe people
idea.
reading the New York
Mhm.
Times aren't the target audience because they're not the
Right.
ones who are going to pay for premium
Right.
standing tickets.
Hmm.
Maybe they are.
And
Maybe they're the ones who are paying for
maybe, who
premium sitting
knows?
tickets. Who knows? No, I totally agree with you.
It's that word experience. Everyone's marketing an experience now. It's not a show. It's, what are you going to experience in that room, in that building, whatever. So, which is why shows spend so much to transform the entire theater into the show, not just the stage. Look at Harry Potter. Like you walk in Harry Potter and you're like, I'm at Hogwarts. Like this is not just me at a theater going into the space where the show is. Like it's so inclusive in that sense that it's like whole holistic that you look at the product.
Yeah.
So given that, we can sit here and talk all day. I'm
Oh,
sure we have
all day.
so much to touch base on. So tell us where people can find you. Where can they find you if they want to kind of connect about like either just informational interviews or your work or collaboration? And then how can people subscribe and get on the list for Broadway Boxed Up?
Yeah, absolutely. And so you can find me pretty much on most social media platforms. Instagram, I'm on most frequently at ANANT_GARDE, Anant Guard. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, just my first name and last name, Anant Das. And you can find Broadway Boxed Up at www.broadwayboxedup.com or at Broadway Boxed Up on all social media platforms.
Love it. Well, thank you so much, Anant, for being here. Like, I loved hearing even more of your story. I know we had a quick intro with Megan Ann, but to sit and really hear your thoughts and processes, like, it's incredible. And so I hope that there are many folks that hear this and are like, oh yes, I'm inspired. I want to learn. Because I also love doing this because I'm providing hopefully potential mentors for people that look like us that are younger than us, because you and we didn't have those. Like, we have the people that are in the industry, but they don't look like us. And so we're grateful to our allies, but to maybe inspire the future generation with somebody that is in their community is why we're here. So you'll be back. There'll be other stuff that we're going to talk about, I'm sure. So, keep your inbox open for the future, because there's so many topics we can touch on.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. And also, to give a quick plug, one thing I think folks in the industry, especially producers of color, if people are interested in being a producer, look into Theater Producers of Color. It's a great network of producers, BIPOC producers, and I think it's one place you can find mentorship or find resources or find folks who maybe also came from a similar background or path as you did. So that's a great advice that I have for folks. Look into Theater Producers of Color or TPOC and see if that might be a place or a cohort that you can engage with.
I love that. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. Until next time, Anant, we will be back.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Producing While Asian podcast. Our theme song was created by Luckstock. We're produced by Press Play Podcasts, and the show is edited by Michael Santos Sandoval. If you have a moment, please leave a rating and a review, and send any ideas you have to producingwhileasian@gmail.com. To follow us, stay updated, or to read our blog, visit www.producingwhileasian.com.